What's up? Awesome. And then one sort of housekeeping item that I want to bring up. So we unfortunately have lost John Hawley, which is really sad. He was a really valuable member to this committee, especially as our facilitator. So I just wanted to put it out there that, it would be great to have another member of this committee facilitate these meetings. Tony and I would send out the agenda to you ahead of time and meet with you briefly if you want before each meeting every other week. Does anyone here have any interest in taking on that role in John's absence?
Well, let's see, who's not here today that can be drafted? Well, as Clara said, the role, really is to run the meetings, but to review the agenda with us ahead of time. And I think the more, again, that this can be led by the communities, the better off we are. So I look for and I know we have several very capable people. We don't have everybody here today, but maybe that's something we can put out and suggest that we nail down at the next meeting.
Yeah, that sounds good, Tony. So I'll put that in the follow-up email so that everyone who wasn't here sees that. And then we'll try to pick someone at our next steering committee meeting to take on that role. All right. So first thing on the agenda is talking about the meeting we had with Consolidated. So I think I'm going to pass it over to David, if that works, to lead us in that sort of conversation about our meeting with Sarah.
Yeah. Thanks, Clara. So it really, I guess I'm just going to kind of punt it back over to the group here because I know that there was some, I won't call it contention, but there were some discussions. And Kevin, I know you were part of those, and I don't mean to laugh. It's just, there were interesting conversations to listen to from what she had to actually say to some of your inquiries. So maybe, Kevin, I start with you and just see what your kind of feeling was on the meeting.
Well, I would say they're still in the running, but how they responded to transparency and giving us the information that we really need to make sure they're doing the job and having specific service level agreements. I think they kind of fell short in that area. But as far as the technology, I think that would work out fairly well. They want to have, fiber to everybody and provide, the type of bit rates that we want, not necessarily latency or jitter. I didn't see that anywhere in their service level agreements, but I think, again, they're still in the running as far as I'm concerned. So.
Anybody else have a comment to that or their own comments to the call? So what I might say is, and this is a very similar trend that at least we're seeing across the state, is that when you look at the financials, right, strictly the financials, obviously, there's a clear winner there because and I'll just say Spectrum's offering to come in and really at no cost to the towns, just build out the rest of their unserved areas. Which, again, if you look at the surface and the strictly the financials, it's kind of a no-brainer, but it really depends on what it is you're looking for.
I would disagree with that in the financials. And when a small business is paying $250 a month for zilch service, right, I would say that's not a financially good option. So no matter how we do it, I think we're going to get a better rate for more service than Spectrum building out, to me. yeah, if you want to say, yeah, I have connection to everybody, yeah, and what kind of a connection is that, and how much does it cost? So I don't think the build out really should be considered as part of a good financial option.
Okay, that's fair. I guess I was coming at it from the construction standpoint, right? Which is the how they answered the RFP and what was entailed with the RFP. Yes, to your point, if you're talking apples to apples on a monthly subscription rate, yes, they are definitely on the higher end of the spectrum, quote unquote.
I think the other thing,
go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing you've got to consider on that is that they're reluctant to commit to anything other than building it out. They're not committing to a timeline. They're not committing to a fee structure. They're not committing to anything there. So, they build it out and we have no control over the fact that all of a sudden they decide to say in a year, we're going to triple the rates. Whereas if we go with one of the other routes, then we have more control that exists there because contractually you can do some things. They're very reluctant to do anything contractually. And the fact is, and I don't think that's, if you look at it from one standpoint, I don't think that Spectrum Maine has a problem. It's Spectrum Corporate says, no one is going to tell us what to do. We're going to tell you what you got and what you're going to pay for it. And that's it.
And by the way, no service level agreements at all.
No, and I could have kind of told you that at the front end that they're not going, the companies that size, you will get, I think, service level agreements from the GWIs, Sebago Fiber, the folks that are, I won't say hungrier, but they're smaller and more agile. I mean, and I know I'm not telling you folks anything you don't know, but when you bring in a Spectrum or even a Consolidated at that size, they're so ubiquitous with their services across their whole footprint across the US that they're just not going to, come into a 5-town consortium and do any sort of service level agreement. So that is another, Rolf, to your point, another thing to take into your perspective of this. If that is a high priority on your list to have that sort of service level agreement that's going to give you some or more control, then Spectrum and even Consolidated isn't the way to go. I know, Claire, we still need to bring Sebago Fiber in for an interview, so that'll be next on my list to try to get them in. So just let's talk around what's kind of being talked about here. So, well, if we stick with the construction cost of, let's stick with Consolidated. It's a fair amount more money than Spectrum's proposal. And there is, I won't say, there's a financial burden on the towns to bond or contribute in some way. Where are you folks on that as far as, and maybe Dan, you can talk a little bit to this when you have your time, but what's the message and the way to go back to the select boards and the community if, let's say, you decide on a Consolidated and it's, I don't have the number in front of me, but it's a fair amount of money that you have to contribute. What's the plan to do that? Or the communication, I guess.
I mean, I think that's going to be the challenge for all of us. We have 5 different communities. If you're going for bonding, all of them will have to go through the town meeting process for bonding, which will be, so the communication and messaging is got to be the critical stages before we get moving anywhere with the financials.
And how prepared are folks to do that, I guess, is the question.
I think having Dan here to help us come up with a single message is the important part, because last thing we need to do is have different messages for each community and alienate one. Again, we'll come up with one consistent message. And I don't want to say have a script, but almost have a script of what we're all going to start with. And then we can become in more incremental steps to become much more detailed to build some momentum for it.
Am I sharing my strategy memo without actually, not even know? You guys seeing my screen now? Is that Tony? Is that what happened?
Is
Tony
this a good,
Ward. Yeah,
is this a good segue? Maybe it's a good segue, Dan, for
yeah.
your.
I'm happy to.
Yeah.
I'm happy to get started.
Yeah, Dan.
Okay with that?
Yeah, I think really quickly before we have you get started, I think I want to just do a quick round of introductions, just so you can get to know which town everyone's coming from. So I will pass it to Rolf and then just say sort of name, town, if you're on the select board or something, or just a resident, and then pass it to someone else.
Rolf Olson, selectman from Raymond. Kevin?
Kevin would be technical support for Raymond and Naples.
And if you want to pass it to, maybe we'll pass it to Meg.
Hi, I'm Meg Williams. I'm a resident of Naples, and I was on the original Naples Broadband Committee. And when John left, he asked me if I would sit in on these meetings. Hopefully we'll get a new town manager quickly so I can get out of these meetings. But in the meantime, you're stuck with me.
Pass it to Tony.
Tony Ward, I'm the town manager with Casco. I'll pass to Zach.
Oh, Zach may be tied up.
All right. So Zach is the town, is working with, he works in Standish. And then I'll pass it to Colin.
Sorry, I'm on my phone. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Colin Brackett. I'm on the select board for Town of Naples, and I'll pass it over to Reed.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Reed. I'm an AmeriCorps fellow with GPCOG.
Awesome. Thanks, Reed. Okay. I think that's everyone. Just wanted to give you a background. I know you've met Tony and I and know David. So, yeah, I think we can sort of segue into talking a little bit about communications and community engagement.
Sure. Well, thank you. I'm Dan Demerit. I'm a longtime communicator. I grew up in Brixton. I graduated from Lake Region High School, class of 1990. Go Lakers! So my mom lived in Raymond for a long time. So I'm from the region. I live in Orono now. I'm a member of the town council, and the last 8 years I led marketing communication at the University of Maine and system, and then at the end of my time with the University of Maine, I've done a lot of communication initiatives and worked on the influence and perception issues at the local, state, and federal level. So happy to be part of this team and excited about what the Maine Connectivity Authority is looking to do. And if you're okay with it, so what I've been tasked with is I work with Henry Joe and the Get Ready cohort, provide kind of high level thinking about strategies for a lot of every cohort's in a little different space. Some are already have funding, a really clear path to funding at the local level that's part of that match. Others are much earlier in the process in terms of what they want to do and where they want to go. And I think about it in terms of this work, and I can share a document, cleaning up a document to share with folks after this meeting to think about kind of where committees can go. But I think at a high level, you got a couple different objectives. It's deliver on the Get Ready deliverables. I mean, you're grantees, so you've got funding, and with an expectation that comes with that in terms of what you're going to build out with that funding. So I think it's important to establish that the committee is being a good steward of those resources. So when you go to apply for the next round, you can tick off the boxes. We committed to deliver these expectations, and we did it. And the communication strategy can help with that. And I think the second objective is doing as much as you can with your be ready for the next round. The Connect the Ready, whether it's this summer's Connect the Ready or a future iteration of that funded by the BEAD funding that we're working towards with the broadband action plan that MCA is leading and so many people are contributing to. So those are how I think about it at the highest level, and kind of apply to everybody who's a Get Ready grantee, and the strategies are kind of will vary. Strategies will be fairly similar across cohorts as well, and then I think about the tactics could be very different. And I very much, Tony Ward, when you talked about messaging, and I think particularly for a multi-community initiative like this, the message does need to be consistent. The messengers will need to be different, and they'll have to have standing within their communities that can be leveraged to bring people along. But when I think about in terms of what a good strategy is for these kinds of initiatives, I think about how the importance of making personal connections and making promises. And I think it's important for this group, and where I would want to be able, where I'd be able to help is help you think about how do you create an identity for this initiative that invites participation, has an action-oriented process that aligns with a service promise. I don't believe it's hard to make a one commitment, an all or nothing, an all or nothing promise, and come out of the gate with that, because these kinds of initiatives, public processes, typically there's so much of this beyond your control. And you need to be careful that you don't make a promise that you either can't deliver on or creates an expectation that you're not going to be able to meet. I like service. I like the idea of like a service promise that's part of a process. Together we're going to get to this outcome. An outcome we can all support. It has a majority of support. I mean, you're never going to get everybody. And I don't spend any time worrying about getting everybody. I worry about majorities, and I worry about trying to influence those people in the middle who are willing to be convinced that a public initiative, an institution, is trying to do the right thing, and adding more people to that mix in the middle. So I used to joke with people that I could, 20% of the population we're always going to vote against a bond question for the university, even if it was to cure cancer. I could get 20% of the population to vote for a bond question that would the chancellor a helicopter. But what I really like doing is working on that 60% in the middle who wanted to be convinced that, by capping tuition and the response that we had to the pandemic, wanted to be convinced the institution was doing the right thing. So that's what I look for in terms of communication strategies. And when I talk about a service promise, talk about that. It's directional. It's not something that lends itself to any one thing, but it's both directional, inclusive, and it leads to opportunities to promote it with your messaging. So I also think that a good message plan, communication strategy, the process, action-oriented process, it's important to define your process and the steps you're going to, and it's like reverse engineering the different elements that need to be in place for you to be successful at the end of the day. So those public meetings, a briefing with the key stakeholders, the members of the select board, a transparent request for proposals where you went out and you asked for input from the ISPs and you brought that back. You're doing the work that you need to do. I'm a little concerned sometimes that not this cohort. I don't know enough about this cohort to have concerns, and I'm sure I won't have any. But I heard some people say it's got to be all this. It's got to be the utility district and municipally owned utility district or bust. And those are difficult positions to put an initiative in, because it starts people out right from the start thinking that the decision's already been made. And people want to be able to come into a process thinking they have, if they choose to, they want to be able to come into a process thinking they have an opportunity to influence it. And if they don't pay attention to anything until the end, they want to be able to look back and think, oh, look, this COLAB group did all these things. And while I wasn't paying attention, they did the work, and they've got a really understandable, defendable process. I tend to believe that public initiatives that leave room in their vision to invite different viewpoints and make course adjustments along the way, and have a really good process, can do almost anything as if they do it right. And it's when they get caught up with being strident about a particular point of view, or move in a way that people think it seems like the fix was in and the decision was already made. That's when things go off the rail. So I think about developing communication strategy with those elements in place. And then I think it's important that the plan itself has a calendar, a schedule of events that show how you're delivering on your promise, and the steps you're taking to invite participation, and ultimately identifies local champions, messengers in your communities, local connection points. What might be most important in Casco may not be as important in Naples. So that you're finding those key message elements that work in those communities, and identifying local champions who will be the messengers for why this is important. I mean, David Hancock in Casco was when I was working, I got my start with Susan Collins, and David Hancock was a big supporter. And it's pretty easy to carry Casco when someone like David Hancock, who is well respected in the community, with clearly seen as a proponent. And you'll all know way better than I will who those people are, or what those pieces might be that make more of a difference in your community, particularly when it comes to an ask for public support.
Hey,
So
Dan,
yeah.
can I ask a question? Sorry.
Sure.
So you're describing a pretty holistic approach, which I think is great, end to end. If you take a committee like COLAB's, who've already kind of progressed to a certain point in the decision-making process of, what the decision hasn't been made, but we're getting pretty far down the road, would you find a kind of a stake area in your plan where you say, okay, well, if you're this far down the road towards a decision, we should really start our marketing message and steps at step C, or what, as opposed to going all the way back and trying to create the whole plan.
No, you gotta throw everything out you've done to this point and start over from right now. No, I think if we're at C with your process, we're at C, but you've got to be able to create a narrative for how you got here in a way that people are going to understand. Hopefully you didn't just pick, I'm sure you didn't just pick pulls out of a hat and say, but you got to be able to go back, you got to backtrack and be able to show people from the start, what it was, the timeline, and how it came to be. This is everything that happens starts with a few people, and you'll be able to show the work you did to get here.
Yeah, you made a great point, that I guess one of the worst things to do would be for this group to all be on the same page with whatever decision you want to make for an ISP, let's say, and then go to and then take that message to the town, councils or the committees or the selectmen, like, oh, we already made the decision, and they're going to be like, wait a minute, you didn't, we didn't have any input into this thing. So we definitely don't want to do that. And I agree with you. I think if we can come up with something that, I don't know if it's PowerPoint slides or whatever it is, but is a 3-page at the most, sort of a message, to Tony's point earlier, that just kind of brings everybody up to speed where we're at now, so that the next time you see me, we will have some sort of movement towards a decision, and this is where we need your input, Mr. Select or Mrs. Select Board or Miss Select Board member.
I like that a lot. I got elected to town council in Orono in March, and my first meeting, the two of us got elected for the first time, and the first meeting, they wanted us to approve a project for something that we hadn't been involved in at all yet. And it's like, well, no, you're gonna have to bring us on, but you're gonna have to make us aware why you want to do this to make us comfortable with the decision. And I think that'll be important. And I think, that 3-page PowerPoint, and then it's personal connection, right? I mean, I'm a huge proponent of, I believe in my core that it's despite all the polarization and nonsense, I believe that personal connection still matters, and I think it's the best tool in existence to reaching understanding. And I think that it may in this case it may involve, you know, one-on-one. Sometimes one-on-one conversations are more important than with the right people, are more important than a glitzy, you know, campaign, or, you know, social media campaign and things like that. I think those conversations about making people comfortable with how you got to where you are now are going to be a critical part of your. If you're already at step C, you're going to have personal conversations with people about how you maneuvered past A and B, and why you're on the right track, but also why there's room for contributions moving forward too.
Great, thank you.
I agree with everything you said, but I think there's two major tracks here. We have the track of what is the best way to deliver what we want in the end technologically. And then the second is, how do we get there? And I think, you know, a lot of people want to see the how we get there, what type of organization we create, you know, do we do it as a group of towns together? You know, those are really, I think, the key things for where we want to, how we want to get there. But we want to get to a certain point, and that's where, you know, where you have the problem with educating the public to see why we want to have this baseline of technology put in place. And so I think there's a lot of stuff that's going to happen then. We need to get a video out. We need to get that to me, that campaign of what we want and why we want it, and then address how do we get there. So
yeah, and I think it'll be important to define it in terms of your audience, so that they can see the value for them in terms of what you're talking about. I really like, you know, terms like ours and together and all of us, you know, things like that. And I don't know what is the in terms of finding it, you know, so all of us have access to this, or, you know, those kinds of things. I like that. You know.
Yeah, the problem is there's a lot of FUD out there and a lot of misinformation, and that's put out by the, you know, the spectrums and other people. So we really need to educate the public with some good solid facts, and, you know, where we are now, what's available from the other vendors, and, you know, where we want to be now and for the future to position ourselves, because this, you know, the information flow across all fields is just increasing daily, and a lot of people don't even realize that. They live in a, you know, a little silo. You know, I can get at my Facebook, and that's great. That's all I need, Facebook and email. But we really need to get the information out to the people of what's happening and where things are going.
It may not be. It may be the value proposition for people might end up being something that's important to their friends and neighbors. You know, their community. You know, people they care about, as opposed to. I mean, they're going to be some of the people you're going to need to come vote for a town warrant. You know, are probably never see themselves needing more than, you know, whatever they've got now in terms of download speed and you know, things like that. So it's how do you make it compelling in terms of things that people care about, or things that I think about in terms of how to make this work. So, and I've always felt that I don't. It's very hard to convince people of something new, a new idea, or something that. So I think the strategy for communication is not so much changing someone's values or changing how somebody feels about something, but showing them how what your initiative is fits with something they already believe in, they already think is important. So it's not about, you know, it just takes a lot of focus on what people care about, but it is, those are the things. Yeah, I hate these campaigns that are, you know, they can yell at each other and get louder and louder, like somehow that's going to change people's minds. Then they oftentimes relate back to fear. And I think to the extent that you can, I think the most successful ways to get to, you know, a compelling message and change outcomes is by not changing minds as much as just shifting say shifting your message and how you deliver it to things that people already care about. So, and that's could be, it takes some creativity to do it, and it's not not to suggest any kind of underhandedness or anything like that, but just how do you put the pieces in place and the messengers that show people that what this initiative is all about matters in terms of things they already care about.
I think there, there's a couple of things you almost first have to let them know where you're, because each of the towns is coming at it from a little bit different as far as penetration and things like that. So you almost have to do a little bit at the front end that says, here's where we're all at. Ultimately, here's where we're going to get. So it's what do you got, what do you want, and how you're going to get there. But the other part of the message has to be, you're talking to individuals and they're going to say, well, what's it going to, what is this big investment going to do for me? And you kind of have to turn that a little bit as far as what is it doing for the community? What is it doing for everybody else? Because if it's just solely, I'm happy with what I've got right now. It's doing everything that I want to do, but you're not looking at the big picture, which is what is it doing generically across the communities and whatnot. And if that's not part of the message, you're going to lose that at the individual level.
Yeah, it's for us. There's got to be ways to define this in terms of things that we all collectively that are important to all of us. So even if you don't have a personal need, you may care enough about your community to support it. So
I will say for Mission Broadband that we've been involved with a number of communities, not just here in the state, but around the Northeast. And it does, to Rolf's point, it does come down to basically two questions. What am I going to get and what's it going to cost me? It really does. I mean,
it does. Yeah.
But I do think what you're talking about, Dan, is important because it just doesn't, you just don't show up and say, okay, here's choice number one. It's going to cost us this. This is what you get. Here's choice number two. You really have to, groom is probably not the best word, but find your way to that point where you've already brought them along with you and they understand what's at stake and what needs to happen. So anyway, but it does ultimately come down to what am I going to get and what's it going to cost me.
But if you get it to what are we going to get as a community, whether it's, access to telehealth that allows us to age in place, or more resiliency because our first responders are going to know, those kinds of things. What are we going to get by this? And so it's not, there's benefits for you individually as well. If you can define it in terms of what's going to make Naples a better place to live, Pasco a better place to live, for all of us, then you can, because that's what it is. I mean, this is public infrastructure and you're asking for public support, and, all of us can go out and get, not all of us, but I mean, a lot of, people can spend different amounts of money to get access to the internet now. And it's just, why is it worthy of a public investment? And that's the question you're asking, and that's the support you need to get. And you've got to be able to define it in terms of why this is worthy of a public, just like a road or a school or, the fire department. So,
right. But the big difference there, it's an infrastructure item, but what you have to appreciate too is it is by and large an invisible infrastructure item. Whereas when you're bonding for roads or whatever, that's a visible. People can drive down the road, they can see what it is. Now you're talking about a concept, you're talking about something that they by and large they can't put their hands on. So you're selling a concept, you're selling an idea, which makes the message a little bit harder to get or a little bit different to put in front of people, because they're not going to physically be able to see what's happening there.
Yeah.
It's only when the end result is done that you've got to change here to there. But so that message has to resonate at that level as well.
Yeah. What's interesting
but
is
everybody freaks out when the internet goes down, though.
Oh,
That's
yeah,
that's how you open your video, right?
What's interesting is I did some work for the petroleum industry once in South Portland, and we had this there's a municipal initiative, and I joked, because I didn't want the Justice Department coming after us, but I'm like, if we just turned off gasoline delivery, gasoline sales for 3 days in South Portland, I could make myself and it's those everyday commodity things, and it's one of the challenges that you have. People, it's a commodity, people kind of expect it, and it's getting to that point with the internet too, and you'll have enough penetration, and it's a question of but yeah, I think if you get to if you can make it, give it the public good and the public need, and define it in those terms, and what would mail be if the postal system be if we didn't all have access to the postal system? It'd be work. It's that universal element of it that makes it work. So, and there's more. You all know you're here, so you all know the reason. So it's just a matter of making it understandable and compelling for people. So you told me this in our call earlier in the week, but are you all grantees in terms of you all have a pool of $10,000? And again, I'm here for, Joe pays for my support generally. But do you all have access to a pot that you can use for engagement in your towns?
Yeah, so each town has 10,000 for community engagement and communications efforts.
And what do you have in terms of, think about it in terms of, you got to do your step C in the process, or whatever the alphabet is. So you're going to have an interesting, time getting prepared to tell people about what's been done already. But then what's the big ask? I mean, is it next June? Is it, that kind of, for like a public, do you have a year to do this? Doesn't feel like you're going to be ready for the end of the summer cohort for the Connect the Ready.
Well, I
Yeah,
know
I think-
Raymond could do a special town meeting just about any time if it's, if we need to. I don't know about the other towns.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with doing a special town meeting is the population at that special town meeting is inherently small. You're much better off if you work it, if everything works towards, especially if you're going to start talking bonding and whatnot, works toward the annual town meetings.
Yeah. Yeah, you start raising red flags when you start doing stuff, especially, I don't know, it's just invites scrutiny that, maybe a concern when you have a special. And so when will you know? So you're where you are in your process, you haven't done, I can go back to send the PowerPoint, and I have it, I looked at it quickly, but so what's the next event? Is there?
Yeah, so I think the stage that we're in right now is we are about to finish up our interviews with internet service providers that submitted proposals to our RFP. And I think we're sort of feeling a little unsure about how to move forward as far as like communicating those results to the public, like how much public input do you get on that? How do you go into the public with sort of an overview of what we've done without like seeming confusing to the public and inviting sort of scrutiny. So I think that transition from like working as a committee to like starting to do more community engagement communications to make this decision on which internet service provider makes the most sense. I think that's sort of where we're at right now, figuring out how to move forward with that.
It could be a good opportunity for engagement in terms of, those one-on-one conversations with key leaders in the key communities, but then a broader engagement around what you've learned from this RFP. And I also think it'd be important, as I think about it, and making sure you provide context in terms of why it is that, some existing providers aren't getting it done in terms of broader community access. You know what I mean? And it's not to point fingers at, it's just not, and I've spent a lot of time driving on the roads where you all live growing up, and it's not, well, people would understand it. We just can't get, private company can't get in, and it's not economical, and but you need to have some of that in place too. And people have awareness. I just can't get internet, but you want to show that in your steps A and B, if you're talking to people how you got to C, you're going to want to talk about why it is we need to do something more than just rely on the incumbent providers. And that they were given a chance to do, and they were given a chance to step up. I think that's part of it too. Why is it that I assume part of your process has been, someone must have called somebody or Spectrum or somebody and said, hey, can you do the whole town? And Spectrum said, no, we can't. I assume that's been the case. That's been the case.
Is it possible, like, we could have, multiple public meetings in each town? But I actually think, thinking about what Rolf was saying, is the town meeting, at least in Raymond, never really gets that many people there to vote in person. And the referendums, though, get a lot more people. And so I think you get a better representation if it went into, and I guess those are twice a year usually, June and in November. But we always get a lot more people that vote. So if you held all the public meetings beforehand that you could to inform people, but then put it on a referendum, you get a much better, I think, cross section of people voting.
But I think a referendum is a good way. Yes, I think, and you get a better selection. I really like. One community has been that I've worked with has been really focused on. They've got a vote in June, and they've been very focused on making sure they turn out. It's town meeting, but apparently you can vote by referendum as well. You can vote by ballot as part of their process, and it's been they're doing a very good job of identifying the 400 if 300 people vote and you get 151 people you can turn out to vote for you. You run the show, and they're doing a very good job of identifying individuals to come out and be a part of that election, make sure their voices are heard as part of that election. So that engagement should be this engagement that you do with the Get Ready grants that you have. I mean, it should be all kind of geared towards turning out, identifying those champions and being in a position where, if it's June 6th, then you've got a ballot question on June 9th. When this process is done, you ought to have, a network of people that you can mobilize, to influence the outcome of that election.
Can you help me understand, Kevin or Dan, what the ballot would be? Would the ballot say, oh, we have the opportunity to work with these three companies, here's the education that we've, providing that there's been education up to that point? Is that the ballot? Is the ballot say, okay, we've kind of honed it down to GWI, Consolidated, and Spectrum? Is that the ballot?
I don't think so. I think the ballot is, do you want to spend money? The committee, this process has identified an opportunity with Consolidated or, whoever, Axiom or whoever, you want to, borrow or appropriate $500,000 for our share of this project.
Well, I think we're maybe getting a little ahead of where we are, since the group hasn't really settled on a particular direction that it would recommend to communities, to select boards, and the actions that will be required will vary depending on the approach. The establishment of a broadband utility district, for example, if that were a direction, might require a very different level of approval, whether that's something select boards and councils can form on their own as a freestanding entity, or if that would still need to go to town meeting or referendum, depending on the community and what their choices are. So I think we're getting a little ahead of ourselves trying to figure out what the questions are. We don't even know what shape a preferred solution will take yet.
Right, but we'd hold several, public meetings to get the public's input for what we
Yeah.
think the solution would be. But I think we're just discussing what the final approval would be at that
You
point.
want to reverse,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
The reverse engineer. We know that whether it's June of 24, November of, you gotta be ready, whatever the approach is. I mean, it strikes me that the municipal approach, the municipally owned, is a higher bar to get over. But and that's why there are fewer of them in terms of the approach, I think, because you've got to really have a very strong local committee. And not to say that this committee's not strong, but you gotta what they did in the Down East utility district is years and years and years in the making, and in terms of what they're able to do. So, and a community where the back was up against the wall. I mean, there's no, I imagine a lot of people in your communities are fairly well served in terms of cable access. I mean, I consider myself, I want fiber, and I've got fiber underground outside my house, and as soon as they've got it ready to bring here, I'm going to take it. But
Well, actually, that might segue to another question I had is, so it all comes down to the funding, right? Whatever selection you make, it's some are need less funding than others. You talked about the next cohort, and so let's just talk about grant possibilities. And with the last cohort, they had preference groups. MCA had preference groups that this particular committee and 5 towns did fall into preference group 3, which basically eliminates them from being able to get funding for whatever solution you have. And that's because of the high penetration of spectrum, right? The 95%, I think, is the number. I don't know if anybody can back me up on that, but I think it's 95%. If the next, it's going to be a different approach with the towns if we know that there is a higher possibility for funding a certain solution, right? So GWI, for instance, probably one of the more expensive because it's a utility district approach. But again, if you had the knowledge that, hey, we've got a fighting chance to get some funding here, that's going to be one approach that you would take to the town, where like you're going to say, hey, look, it's not a lot of money out of our pocket, we're going to be helped a lot by these grants. Or if it's the other situation where, and I'm not sure, I was on the last mile call yesterday, Dan, I don't know if you were listening in on that, but they were trying to tip their hand a little bit to how they're going to approach this next cohort. They're not doing preference groups. They are going to give some more leeway time for people to apply and to get their ducks in a row. So it sounds like they learned some lessons from the last one, and they're gonna try to to change things up. But again, my point is that if this next cohort specifically is based on a preference group type of a situation where it's based on your percentage of penetration, that if you can get the service, doesn't matter who it is, if you can get the service, it's 95% of that is in your communities, then your chances of a grant are pretty slim. So I'm only saying this because it becomes two different approaches completely to how you would go back to the towns to try to discuss these things. So
so then one is one more, a lot more skin in the game in terms of the local level and things like that, and maybe that's part of good communication gets a lot easier when you've got when you're asking for less, you've got a solution that is more viable, doesn't take you're gonna ask for $1 billion out of Naples. Well, I can't help you. You're never going to get it. But if you've got something that seems reasonable in the scheme of things, reasonableness is one of the most fundamental parts of communication. So yeah, I think, and it sounds like you've got an opportunity to do some, and I could put this together in terms of in terms of an outline for you to, again, I don't have the intimate knowledge of where you are in your process. But I could put together a 2-pager, frame it out for you, react to it, and then, move things around based on where you actually are in the process. But I can put that together, and I don't know what the right way to get it to the whole group is. And then, that kind of, you only meet monthly or?
We meet every 2 weeks.
Every 2
So we
weeks,
won't
perfect,
meet
yeah.
next Thursday, but we'll meet the following Thursday. So
Sure.
we could look at it then.
Yeah, I could have something to you, Clara, you're the point person for, so I mean, I could have something.
Yeah.
I didn't see anybody stand up and be the mediator. I don't know what the mediator job was, but I was careful not to raise my hand for that, but beyond the scope of my contract, but.
And I'm happy to fill in any gaps about like where we are along the process and stuff as you build it out.
So why don't I ship it to you and Tony first, Tony Plant, and then you can, whatever I've missed, and then I know we can send it back, and I'd love to come back in 2 weeks and see if we can't have something that it's actionable or close to actionable.
Yeah, that sounds great, Dan.
I'm pretty busy with Taylor Swift concerts over the next couple of weeks, but other than that, gosh,
Jealous.
there's not a reason to have broadband internet. It's just watching all those Taylor Swift videos. She's amazing.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Dan. I think that sounds like a really good next step. In addition to, I know David mentioned trying to schedule the meeting with Sebago Fiber sometime in the next couple weeks. And then the sort of third next step is Kendra Joe wants to meet with us as a group just to talk about how our broadband planning process is going and just get a sort of sense of where we are. So look out for an email trying to schedule that in the next coming weeks. But I think those are sort of our immediate next steps. Does anyone have any last comments before we adjourn? All right. Well, I will follow up with an email outlining those next steps for the folks that weren't able to make it today. And I will also send out a recording of the consolidated meeting and Reed's notes so that people who missed that meeting are able to see it. And I will see you all in 2 weeks or maybe at the summit this afternoon if anyone is planning.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Claire.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks.